Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
A reading from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 4, verses 12 through 23, is on page 3 of the Pew Bibles. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and the shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. God is still speaking. Let our minds be open to listen and understand.
Would you pray with me, please? O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your presence. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It seems like a big ask, doesn't it? To leave behind everything. To forsake your livelihood, your home, your family, everything you have ever known, and follow an itinerant preacher whom you've never even met before. Here near the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, we're witnessing the start of Jesus' public ministry. The first two chapters of Matthew concern his birth. The third chapter tells of John the Baptist and recounts the moment when Jesus went to John at the Jordan River and asked to be baptized. Immediately after his baptism, Jesus is driven off into the wilderness for 40 days and nights, and then we have this story. Jesus hasn't performed any miracles yet. He hasn't shown himself to be anything particular one way or another yet in public. He hasn't taught good news. He hasn't healed people who are sick and suffering. He hasn't blessed children or argued with religious leaders. Now, I suppose it's possible that Simon and Andrew and James and John had known John the Baptist and had heard of Jesus because of him, but the story doesn't say that. There's no particular scriptural reason to think that that was the case. Jesus, at this point, is an unknown quantity. Here he comes, walking along the shores of the Sea of Galilee. "Follow me," he says. And they do. Immediately, the story says, immediately they leave their nets, their boats, their father, and follow. Perhaps it was sheer force of personality that drew them to Jesus. Maybe he was just that magnetic of a guy. Perhaps there were more words exchanged that are not recounted here. Perhaps there were some actions or promises to go along with the invitation. But that call to leave everything and follow sounds like such a leap into the unknown. It makes me wonder, as we wondered together about Mary back in December, whether there were others who received that invitation and declined to accept the opportunity they were being offered. It is truly a sign of my relative privilege and comfort in the world that I would probably be among those who said thanks but no thanks. I must confess, the idea of leaving everything behind to follow a character like Jesus does not ring in my ears like an offer I'd leap to accept, but rather as a terrifying loss of stability, familiarity, security. But if you're like me, and if we're honest, maybe there's also, mixed in with that very real fear of loss, a little smidgen of relief at the idea of being set free from all the obligations and responsibilities and busyness and burdens of life. Maybe there's also a little flash of freedom at the idea of following where the wind of the Spirit might blow and let the chips fall where they may. Maybe there's also a little tinge of excitement when you contemplate the possibilities of what you might do, where you might go, how you might serve, whom you might become. I suspect that for Simon and Andrew and James and John, both of those things were there, but perhaps in the opposite proportions as they are for me. I suspect that for them, relief and freedom and excitement were the larger part of their response, and fear of loss was the little smidgen. Fishing was then as now hard and physical and dangerous work. The Sea of Galilee was and is a notoriously unpredictable body of water. Sudden storms can swamp boats in the blink of an eye. Even for those who avoid shipwreck, profit margins are slim. And at the time of Jesus, margins were becoming slimmer because of new regulations and taxes imposed by the Roman Empire. Fishermen, like the shepherds who attended Jesus' birth, fishermen were held in low esteem because they were dirty and smelly, and they worked odd hours that put them out of step with polite society. So although it was probably all they had ever known, perhaps the idea of leaving behind nets and boats was a welcome one for Simon and Andrew and James and John. In fact, the original language of the gospel reinforces this idea. The verb that is translated here as to leave, as in they left their nets, their boats, their father to follow, is elsewhere in the Gospels used for leaving behind debt, sin, and bondage. In fact, it is the same verb that shows up when Jesus teaches his disciples how to pray, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." It carries with it a sense of relief, of release, of redemption. Jesus was calling them to leave behind the dominion of the Roman Empire and enter into the dominion of God. To leave behind systems of economic exploitation, to leave behind entrenched inequality along lines of race, religion, class, gender, or citizenship, to leave behind rigid social hierarchy, the idea that some people are deserving of more rights and resources, more protection and privilege, and others are deserving of less. To leave behind family structures that often constrained people's possibilities. To stop participating in death-dealing systems, and to start living the abundant and joyful life for which they were made. And even if we're right that the proportions of fear and freedom were reversed for the disciples, that the relief and freedom and excitement they felt at this call greatly outweighed the fear of loss that I feel hearing it. Even if this invitation sounded mostly like good news to those early disciples who followed Jesus, it can hardly have been an easy thing to do. Good news though it may have been, it required leaving gainful employment and economic security in exchange for relying on the kindness and charity of strangers. It required leaving family relationships and community, which, no matter how fraught, were nevertheless the foundational framework of their lives. It required an intentional break with the status quo, a choice to lean into the unknown. It required courage. but it did not require perfection. The disciples, as you know if you've read further in the Gospels, were notorious bumblers. Over and over again, Jesus chastised them for missing the point, getting it wrong, having no idea what they were doing. They messed things up more times than they got them right, up to and including betraying Jesus, deserting him, and going right back to their old ways after he died, back to the fishing nets and the boats, in spite of all he had taught them. And yet they, in all their imperfection, were the ones whom Jesus called, and although they were in no way free of errors, they nevertheless managed to build the beginnings of a movement that continues today in this very place, in this very time. It required courage. It did not require perfection, and they did not have to do it alone. When they left their nets, their boats, their families, the disciples entered into a new set of relationships. A chosen family of sorts, people who would support them and rely on them, who would love them and hold them accountable, who would challenge them and affirm them and help them to become their best selves. It required courage. It did not require perfection, and they did not have to do it alone. And friends, the same is true for us. Not all of us are called to leave everything, home and family and work and love, in order to follow Jesus, but all of us are called to follow. And sometimes that requires leaving behind things that hold us back from the full and abundant life for which we are made. It may be terrifying. It is just about never easy. It always requires courage, but it is ultimately good news. To the one who feels trapped in a job that is harming their body or their soul, Jesus says, "Follow me, for you are not made for work alone." To the one whose parents have just kicked them out because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, Jesus says, "Follow me into a life where you are celebrated and cherished for all the fierce and fabulous fullness of who you are." To the spouse stuck in a cycle of abuse at the hands of the one who's supposed to love her most, Jesus says, "Follow me and encounter the love that bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." To the working mom who has a job she loves and a family she cherishes and feels like she's supposed to be able to be fully present to them both, so she burns the candle at both ends and has nothing left for herself and feels like she still isn't enough, Jesus says, "Follow me into a life where your needs matter too." To the young black man being told on every side that his life does not matter, Jesus says, "Follow me, for you are made in God's very own image, and you deserve to be treated as such." To the young white man being told on every side that every sign of weakness, any crack in his armor, any situation where he is not in control is a threat to his identity and value, Jesus says, "Follow me and learn that weakness in the eyes of the world is strength in God's sight." To the elder whose friends have passed, whose children have moved away, who is afraid no one will notice when she finally dies, Jesus says, "Follow me, for your name is written in the book of life." To the one suffocating under the thick shroud of depression, who is pretty sure that everything is impossible and it's too hard even to try, Jesus says, "Follow me and let me carry your burdens, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." To the one who feels so afraid so often that nothing and nowhere feels safe, Jesus says, "Follow me, take shelter under my wings, for I am gentle and humble of heart." To the parts of each and every one of us that are bound, that are entangled, that are caught in nets from which we cannot escape on our own, Jesus says, "Follow me, let me release the ropes. Let me free you from the fishhooks. Let me untie you from all that would hold you back from the abundant and joyful life for which you were made. And then follow me and do likewise for others." Amen.